What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today. Welcome to my channel and welcome to what I can only assume is going to be a pretty lengthy video. So stay tuned. We got a lot to break in, a lot to digest, but I want to talk about everything to do with the college football playoff here. We have some talking points. I'll go through some scenarios at the end on what might happen if this, that, and the other were to happen. And we're just going to go ahead and break things down and have some fun here on the channel. Hey, if you are new to the channel, I really do encourage you, hit that subscribe button, ring that bell. We have a lot of fun here on the channel, and I'd really appreciate it if you would help support me. And the biggest way you can do that is by subscribing and ringing the bell, especially if you are as big of a college football nerd as I am. But if you simply want to kick back, relax, and watch this video, I don't blame you. This is going to be a long, entertaining video with a lot to digest. So I hope you all will tune in and be ready. But please support me in any other way you can, whether that's giving me follows on social medias at Tailgate829 or doing anything else you can do to interact with the channel. All helps to support me. All very grateful for it. I'm just going to waste no more time. Let's dive on in. We got a ton of talking points to talk about and a ton of things to really go over when you're talking about the college football playoff. Expansion is here, and this Sunday is going to be one of the most anticipated days, at least for me in my college football lifetime. This is just going to be so fascinating to see where teams fall, how far teams fall, how high teams rise, who's in, who's out, especially if we get some really interesting conversations down the stretch. But one interesting conversation that has already been talked about a little bit and debated very, very highly on many social media platforms is whether the committee got this ranking right, whether putting Alabama above these three other teams right here was the right decision. And I'm here to tell you, I think it was. I think putting Alabama above these three teams was the right decision, and I'll tell you why right now. You can't see it, and I apologize if I keep looking over in this direction a lot. I have a lot of notes and things on my kind of second screen here that I want to share with all you fine people. Obviously, you can't see, but that's why you watch the video and listen, right? So you can hear what I have to say. We're going to go through these teams' resumes, take a look at their strength of schedule, strength of record, and all of the numbers that I'm about to spew at you are from ESPN analytics, and because it was really the easiest thing that I could find and access, and any other advanced analytics say pretty similar things here as well. So let's start with the number 11 team according to the committee, the Alabama Crimson Tide. What are their best wins? Well, they have a win at home against Georgia, a win at home against South Carolina, and a win at home against the Missouri Tigers. All three teams the committee has ranked in their college football playoff top 25. They also do have a win on the road against LSU, where they slaughtered the Tigers by 29 points in Death Valley. You'll notice the pattern. All those wins are at home. But their losses, okay, you got a loss on the road to Tennessee. Tennessee is going to make the college football playoff. Not a bad loss at all. The other two losses for Bama will make you scratch your head. On the road at Vanderbilt and on the road at Oklahoma. Those are two games that are absolutely going to tank Bama's sort of resume and tank their chances at getting an at-large spot of the college football playoff, so people would have thought. But you look overall, their strength of schedule is 17th in the nation, and their strength of record is the best out of anybody on this list. It is 10th in the nation. Let's move on to the Miami Hurricanes. Their best wins on the road at Florida, on the road at Louisville, and at home against the Duke Blue Devils. Okay, so who did they lose to? Georgia Tech and Syracuse. The one team that Miami has played in the college football playoff top 25 just entered the top 25 in the Syracuse Orange. And why did they enter? It's because they beat Miami last week. That is exactly why Miami is behind Alabama. And these numbers support that. Their strength of schedule is 55th. And their strength of record is 14th. I guess I should preface what I just said by saying they're not ahead of Bama because their schedule simply just doesn't compare. They do not have the wins that Alabama does. Alabama's got to win against Georgia, who could go win the SEC championship tomorrow afternoon. That is why Miami is behind Alabama. They don't have the resume that Alabama has. In fact, out of all the four teams we're going to talk about in this segment, they have the worst strength of schedule at 55. Ole Miss is there at 31. Their strength of schedule is 31. Their strength of record is 18. That's the worst out of any team on this list, but still fairly high amongst the nation's teams. On the road at South Carolina, they beat Arkansas on the road, and then a win against the Georgia Bulldogs. That is what Ole Miss has to stake to their resume, but their three losses more puzzling than the Alabama losses. At least Alabama's got a loss that you could say, okay, I can see why they lost that one on the road at Tennessee. The Ole Miss on the road at LSU is probably the loss you look at and saying, yeah, okay, I can understand that one. But at home against Kentucky, on the road against Florida, teams that Ole Miss should have been able to beat, especially that one at home against Kentucky. If they would have won that game, I mean, we're talking about a pretty easy decision here and why Ole Miss is above Alabama for the college football playoff. Instead, nope, we're talking about Ole Miss being ranked 13th behind Alabama and Ole Miss, but then this is where a lot of the complaints came in. South Carolina. Why isn't South Carolina here? They have the quintessential best losses. They're playing some of the best football of anyone in the country. Look at their resume. Okay, let's look at their resume. Win at home against Texas A&M. Very good win. Win at home against the Missouri Tigers. To me, not that impressive of a win, but to the committee, a team that a committee that has Missouri ranked, good win. And then on the road against Clemson, phenomenal win. South Carolina's got a lot of good wins on their resume, and they got a lot of losses that you can also look at and say, okay, yeah, I understand why they lost that game. Now, the game against LSU, there was a call that got made, and the SEC admitted its wrongdoings, and the game was stolen from South Carolina, whatever it is you want to say, but they did lose that game to LSU. But they also lost to Alabama and to Ole Miss. So to me, I get the argument why South Carolina should be put above these teams. I think they're playing the best football out of any one of these three teams on this list. I think they do have the quintessential best losses. Let's take a look at these two numbers. Highest strength of schedule on the board at 15th, and they're 9-3 with some not too bad losses, and their strength of record is second highest on this board, only one spot nationally behind Alabama. Bama was 10th. South Carolina is 11th. So what is holding South Carolina back? The results on the field. But Nate, you just said they have some good wins and some losses that are completely understandable. That they do. Only problem, their two losses were to Alabama and to Ole Miss, two teams that rank above them, and head-to-head results matters. I understand the argument that the whole body of work matters, but when two teams play a game on the football field, doesn't matter how good or bad you play, if Team A beats your team, they're going to be ranked higher than you more often than not if you have pretty similar resumes and stats and records, and that's exactly the case of Alabama and Ole Miss being ahead of South Carolina. Okay, so then why is Miami sort of in this mix? Well, it's because Miami has a win over a team that Ole Miss lost to, and that is the Florida Gators. Even though their metrics and stuff just don't compare to Ole Miss, they do have that head-to-head win over a common opponent. But did the committee get it right in selecting the Alabama Crimson Tide? I think, yeah. They have the win over South Carolina, which is going to bump them out. They have a win over Georgia, which is huge. Now, Ole Miss does too, but Ole Miss has got the more perplexing loss. They have the most perplexing loss, which is that home game against Kentucky. And Alabama, out of their three losses, one of them was to a ranked team, and Ole Miss can't say that none of their three losses were to a current team that was ranked. So yes, I do think the College Football Playoff Committee got it right, and Alabama being the team that, if everything were to work out and there's one spot that's left, which likely there will be, Alabama will be filling that role. We'll talk more about Bama later, but really, really quickly, I just want to go over some teams that have clinched their spot in the College Football Playoff, in case any of you out there maybe are saying, oh, I don't really know who is definitely in. These 8 teams are definitely going to be in. That's Oregon, Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame, Georgia, Ohio State, Tennessee, and Indiana have all secured their spots in the College Football Playoff. Why? Well, let's think about it. Oregon, Texas, Penn State, Georgia, they're all playing for conference championships. They are all top 5 teams. There's no way they fall out of that field. Ohio State, no way they fall out of the field with how highly ranked they are at 6. Tennessee at 7, same thing. And Indiana at I believe they're at 9. I'll fact check that, but I know Indiana at very least is in that top. Yes, actually, I am remembering now. Indiana is 9. They are safe. They are definitely safe. And then Notre Dame, 11-1. Yes, they have the worst loss out of any contending team, but that doesn't matter. They got some really good wins. They're ranked number 4. They're 11-1 in a year where a lot of teams, in fact, most teams have 2 losses. Notre Dame is absolutely going to be that team that breaks into the college football playoff. And we'll talk about where all these teams can rank and things like that a little bit later. We're probably not going to dive too deep into it because it does get very, very complicated very fast. But there you go. Those are the 8 teams that have clinched a spot in the college football playoff. So that leaves 4 spots left. Nate, where are those 4 spots going to go? Well, I'll tell you right now. So the final 4 spots are going to go to a combination of these 7 teams that you see down here. We've already established why Alabama won that sort of initial at-large spot race, and there just is no way, with all the combinations and all the things that can happen, there's no way for Miami, Ole Miss, South Carolina, none of them are going to end up breaking into the college football playoff field. Those teams have essentially been eliminated from college football playoff contention. Nothing is going to change in the committee's hands, at least it shouldn't, moving forward. So where do the final 4 spots go? It's up to a combination of these teams. Quite simply put, and I know the college football playoff and the rankings and things get very complicated very fast. This is very simple. Whoever wins the games between the pairs of teams, so whoever wins the Big 12 championship between Iowa State and Arizona State, they will be in. UNLV and Boise State, winner of that game tonight, will be in the college football playoff. And Clemson and SMU, the winner of that game, will be in the college football playoff, with the loser likely eliminated, barring one exception, and that is the ACC championship. So just to recap, you saw the 8 teams earlier that clinched their spot. The final 4 teams are going to come down to a combination of these 7. Winner of the Big 12, winner of the Mountain West, winner of the ACC, and then one more team, right? And the one more team comes down to the at-large opponent in the Alabama Crimson Tide and to the SMU Mustangs. Now, here is why. It doesn't matter who wins the Big 12, the loser is out. It doesn't matter who wins the Mountain West, the loser is out, the winner is in. Same thing. Again, if Clemson beats SMU, then it's a conversation between Alabama and SMU. Who gets that final spot in the college football playoff? We've already established 8 positions are sold out. 8 positions are firmly locked in place. You have 3 positions that'll be decided by conference championship games. The 4th and final position left is down to a combination of 2 teams. Now, if SMU wins the ACC, it's pretty clear that SMU and Bama will both get in the college football playoff. If it's Clemson that's going to win the ACC, then you have to have this conversation, which we're about to have right now. SMU versus Alabama. Who gets in to the college football playoff? Well, let's do the same thing that we just did with Bama. I'll remind you of their resume. Wins over Georgia, Missouri, and South Carolina, with losses to Vanderbilt, Tennessee, and to Oklahoma. Strength of schedule of 17, strength of record of 10. Let's look at SMU's resume now. They have a win over the Louisville Cardinals. And again, when we're taking a look at this resume, we are assuming that SMU lost the SEC champion or the ACC championship game, because that's the only way Alabama and SMU are going to be compared to find out who's in the college football playoff. Obviously, if SMU wins, they're going to be in. Louisville, Duke, and Pitt. Those are probably the 3 best wins that SMU has had to this date. Their losses. Well, you remember all the way back in I think it was week 3, they lost that game at home to the BYU Cougars. They have proven to not be too bad of a team this year. And then in this scenario, they would have lost in the ACC championship game to the Clemson Tigers. Their strength of record is 9. So it actually right now is better than the Alabama Crimson Tide. Of course, that could change after the college, that could change after the conference championship games. But their strength of schedule is 75th in the country. Yikes. That, I think, is going to doom SMU in the scenario, and it's why I believe that the committee would put Alabama above SMU if the Mustangs were to lose the ACC championship game. Now, do I think that's right? No. I think there are a lot of teams out there that are unfairly punished for losing their conference championship game, and this year, SMU could be one of them. Whatever argument you want to make, if you want to make this argument, last year, Georgia was one of those teams that a lot of people feel got unfairly punished for losing their conference championship game. Now, again, last year was what it was. A lot of good teams, things of that nature, and only a 4-team field. But when you're taking a look at these 2 teams, and Alabama and SMU, and comparing them, there just really is no comparison. Alabama's resume is better, but you have to factor in Alabama didn't make their conference championship game. SMU did. And it also could play into a factor how close the game is. Because if SMU goes into the ACC title game and gets shellacked and blown out by the Clemson Tigers, then, well, it's probably going to be a pretty easy decision for the College Football Playoff Committee to put Alabama above SMU after they lost the ACC championship game. But then what if SMU keeps it close? What if maybe they're winning most of the game and Clemson makes a late rally and kicks a late field goal? Then there's a conversation to be had. So again, it kind of depends on what happens within those games. But for the SMU Mustangs, they are going to want to win the ACC championship game, because I guarantee you if they get into this conversation and the committee room is going back and forth between Bama, SMU, the committee is going to roll with the tide in that, because of the resume that Alabama does possess. That is my prediction. I could be wrong. I think there's still a very good case for SMU beating Alabama if Clemson were to beat them in the ACC championship game for that final spot in the college football playoff. I think there's a very good case for that to be made. Is it the case I think the committee's going to make? No. I think the committee will find a way to put Alabama in that field. And no, it's not because SEC bias or anything like that. No, it's just Bama quite simply has the better resume than SMU. Me personally, I feel like you should reward them playing in the conference championship, because even in the ACC, a league in a conference where you look at and you say, I mean, they're not as good as the Big 10, SEC, Big 12, whatever else it is you want to say. SMU still made the conference championship game. I feel they should be rewarded with that. If they do lose to Clemson, that'll be a very interesting conversation between Alabama, between SMU, because it will come down to who gets that final spot. So that is who would be left. And I did want to talk about the Bama and SMU conversation. So let's do a little bit of predictions. Let's remind you a little bit of what my predictions were. Who do I think is going to be left? Well, actually, before we get to that, I'll tell you who I think is going to be left. Arizona State, Boise State, SMU, and Bama. I think of the teams that are going to get into the college football playoff. Again, that's just my personal opinion. I had a graphic prepared. I didn't realize that. I took it out there as well. Okay, so now let's get into some talking points, right? Because the College Football Playoff Committee has done this before. Nate, what's this? What's going to happen to the losers of conference championships? Now, we know what's going to happen to the loser of the Big 12, of the Mountain West, and of the ACC. More likely than not, is they'll be dropped out of the college football playoff race. That's not confusing to understand. What is confusing to understand is what's going to happen to the losers of the SEC and Big 10 championship games, and how far are they going to fall? Because let me just give you some examples as to why this is a big talking point, and this is going to be something really interesting to see, especially if the two teams that are ranked at 3 and 5 in Penn State and Georgia both lose their conference championship games. How far are they going to fall is the interesting conversation we have to have. And the reason this conversation has to be had is the playoff committee has done this before. Let's take a look back just a year ago to the Georgia Bulldogs. They were the number 1 team in the country going into Champ Week. They lose that game against Alabama, and then they fall all the way to 6. Granted, they fell below every single Power 5 team at the time that had won at conference championships. Georgia didn't, and it's why they got left out of the college football playoff field. Oregon, they were the number 5 team in the country last year, lost that game to the Washington Huskies. Everyone knew they weren't going to make the college football playoff, but then they dropped below Ohio State, a team that didn't even play for their conference championship, showing that the committee is punishing Oregon for losing the conference championship and dropping them below a team that didn't even earn the right to play for their conference championship. That's just one example. There are more. 2022, USC was number 4, had to win the Pac-12 to make the college football playoff, and didn't. They lost to Utah that year. Now, they dropped below Ohio State, Bama, and Tennessee because they fell all the way down to 10th. No conference championship even being played for any 3 of those teams. Ohio State, Bama, Tennessee didn't even make their conference championship game. They also dropped below Utah and Kansas State, who were championship winners. They did win their conference that year, but the more important thing to note is they dropped below 3 teams that didn't even play for a conference title. And then one more, the LSU Tigers. They lost in 2022 to the Georgia Bulldogs. They dropped below Oregon and Oregon State after they lost that game. And neither of those 2 teams, both members of the Pac-12 at the time, made the conference championship. You want more examples? Why not? Let's go back to 2021. Same thing. Oklahoma State, number 5 team, needed to win the Big 12 to get to the college football playoff. Couldn't get it done. They fell to 9, and they dropped below Ohio State and Ole Miss two teams that didn't even play in the conference championship game. Obviously, they dropped below Baylor because they beat them. But then Oregon, again, they were number 10, lost the Pac-12 championship game that year, dropped to number 14. They dropped below Michigan State and BYU, who that year did not play in the conference championship game. So what am I trying to say? The committee, whether you think it is fair or unfair, and I believe it is unfair. I believe you should reward teams for playing in the conference championship game rather than punish them when they lose that game, right? That's just the way that I view this. But the committee, as far back as history goes, has always viewed it differently. They punish teams for losing their conference championship. So what if Penn State loses to Oregon? And what if what I'm predicting happens? Go back and watch my Big Ten preview prediction, and that Oregon wins pretty convincingly. Does Penn State fall below Ohio State? Do they absolutely assuredly fall below Notre Dame? Do they fall below Ohio State? Do they maybe even fall below a Georgia team that might keep the game against Texas pretty darn close? Do they fall below Tennessee? How far do they tumble? How far does the SEC runner-up tumble? If it's Texas, where do they drop? If it's Georgia, do you drop them behind Ohio State then as well? The top 8 is going to be reshuffled no matter what happens, and no matter what team loses, Notre Dame is assuredly going to get that 5 seed. Unless Oregon loses the Big Ten championship, then they are the 5 seed there. But the thing I'm really interested to watch on Sunday, if Penn State and Georgia, or if Oregon and Texas, or if Oregon and Georgia, or Penn State and Texas, whatever combination you want to come up with in there, it'll be fascinating to see how far those teams fall and where they get seated in the college football playoff bracket. So, okay, that was the negative side of things. Now let's go to the positive side of things. Where are any one of these teams over here going to be ranked after they win their conference championship? It works in both directions. Teams have been punished for losing their conference championship games, whether you think it's unfair or not, or what a lot of people feel like, hey, this is pretty fair. Teams get rewarded for winning their conference championships. Last year is a perfect example. Texas was number 7 in the country. They won the Big 12. They jumped all the way up to number 3 and in the college football playoff. Alabama, they were ranked number 8. They jumped all the way up to number 4 after beating Georgia in the conference championship game. Florida State was the one exception. And again, Florida State is the weird snare in 2023. A lot of good teams towards the top there, a lot of controversy. Okay, but the pattern continues, right? Let's go back to 2022. Utah, they're on this list more than once. They were number 11 before they won their conference championship game. Then they were 8. Clemson was 9. Then they were 7. Kansas State was 10. And then they were 9. Not much room to go in 2022 towards the top. Okay, let's go to 2021. Baylor went from 9 to 7 after beating Oklahoma State. But the key thing to notice is they didn't jump Ohio State in those final rankings. Interesting. Very interesting, because Ohio State, as we've already established before, didn't end up playing in that conference championship game. Okay, let's keep going. Pitt, they were number 15. Now, I know we're going down the list quite a bit here, but Pitt, they were number 15 before they won the ACC championship game in 2021 against Wake Forest. Then they jumped all the way up to number 12, and Utah made the biggest jump out of anyone on this list. They were number 17, and they jumped all the way up to number 11 after beating Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game. Now, notice they didn't jump Michigan State, who didn't play for their conference championship, and they also didn't jump Oklahoma State, who lost their conference championship. Just a couple things to chew on there. Maybe put a couple sticky notes on the wall, stare at it for a little bit, and think about what you think about it. But the reason that I point this out is, yes, teams have been punished unfairly, as I've already said, for losing their conference championships. Teams have also been rewarded for winning their conference championship. So obviously, if Boise State wins, they're probably going to get a first-round bye. That's the reward that they currently have. That's the reward that they will have if they get the job done against UNLV. But the bigger question resides outside of it. If UNLV beats Boise State, they're almost assuredly going to be the 12 seed. It's not a mystery what's going to happen to the winner of the Mountain West Conference. Boise State wins, they get a first-round bye. UNLV wins, they are number 12. No exceptions, no ifs, ands, or buts. What is interesting to talk about is same thing kind of with the SMU Mustangs. If they win the ACC, they're going to get a first-round bye, no questions asked. But Clemson, where do you put them if they win the ACC? Maybe it's the 12, but I honestly could see Clemson as high as 11 or 10, maybe even 9 if the committee feels like they go up that high. It also depends on the result of the game. Maybe Clemson's got to blow out the Mustangs, or maybe this or that has to happen, whatever it is you would like to say. But I mean, what do you do with Clemson? More importantly, what do you do with the winner of the Big 12 championship? I think there are quite a few people out there that are going to say the winner of the Big 12 deserves to host a first round college football playoff game, which means they would have to be no lower than the 8 seed. Well, you take a look at where those two teams are ranked right now, and those two teams are ranked at 15 and 16. Now, being the 8 seed does not mean that those two teams have to be ranked at the number 8 position, but it does mean that either one of those two teams is probably going to have to vault into the top 10. The team that currently holds the 8 seed right now is the Tennessee Volunteers. It is the Ohio State Buckeyes, and they're ranked all the way up at 6th. So yeah, that much, but I mean, where do you put them, right? Do you even maybe put them at 9? Does it jump Tennessee or Indiana and anything else that they have done this year? Does it jump Ohio State because they haven't played in the conference championship game? Where do you put the winner of the Big 12 championship, and how far do they rise? I'm not totally convinced that the winner of the Big 12 will just be the 12th seed and that wipe your hands clean of it and that's it. I think the Big 12 champ is going to rise up a little bit. I don't think they're going to rise up as far as 8 or 9. I think maybe at highest they might be 9, but I'm thinking 10th or 11th for the Big 12 champ is probably where they're going to end up falling. Wouldn't surprise me if they're at the 12th overall seed. No, not really, but it's a good exercise to think about and good for up there. So, okay, we touched on all the talking points. We broke down everything that can happen. Let's play some things out. Let's play out some scenarios. And I know we're already at almost half an hour, so I'll try to make this segment of this episode go pretty darn fast. But let's just kind of go seed by seed here, right? 1 seed, it's going to be Oregon if they win the Big Ten. Or actually, let's just go through team by team. Tennessee, they're kind of waiting the results of everything. And honestly, let's not even get into specifics. Let's just do broad stuff because, look, there's so many scenarios that can happen, and you can only predict what the College Football Playoff Committee is going to rank teams as, and it depends on how close games are. If Texas and Oregon is close, or I should say, if Oregon and Penn State is close and Penn State loses, maybe Penn State doesn't fall as far as some people may think. I think, though, the loser of the SEC championship game and the Big Ten championship game, unless it's Texas and Oregon, so if Penn State and Georgia lose the SEC and Big Ten championship games, I think they're going to end up falling below Ohio State. Do they fall below Tennessee? That's another conversation that you can have. I think both of them are going to be hosting first-round playoff games anyway, but again, it all depends on seeding. How high does the Arizona State Sun Devils go, right? There is a fascinating article put out by College Football News. I don't know. Actually, I do know who wrote it. I have it right here. I will butcher your last name, so I apologize, but Pete Fiutak, I know I butchered your last name. I apologize. He does really good work over at College Football News. You don't know what that is. It's a website. I really like reading their stuff. He does a phenomenal breakdown of likely things that could happen seed by seed. I highly encourage you to go check out that article because it simplifies things in an article form that I could sit up here and talk about for 10 to 15 to 20 minutes, and it still may not make sense. He does a phenomenal job. Highly encourage you to go look at that. But otherwise, I mean, let's just take a look at my scenario, for instance, right? And all the conference championship games that I've picked, I think Boise State wins. I think Oregon wins pretty comfortably. I think Texas wins, but it's close. I think Arizona State wins, but it's close. And I think SMU beats Clemson. Well, we already know the 12 teams that would be in at that point, but then where do you rank teams? How far does Penn State fall? How far does Georgia fall? And I'm more interested with how far teams are going to fall rather than teams are going to rise besides the Big 12 champ. I'm really, really curious to see how high the Big 12 champ is going to rise in the final college football playoff rankings and see where they fall in that line. But there are so many scenarios, so many different things that you can play out. This is just going to be an absolutely crazy weekend. I cannot wait to watch these games. I can't wait to watch the selection show on Sunday, my birthday, by the way. This is just going to be an absolutely fascinating weekend. Can't wait for it. You can play out all the scenarios in the head that you want. The chaos scenarios on what if every team were to lose that's favored, right? What if Penn State wins? What if Georgia wins? What if it doesn't really matter, Arizona State or Iowa State, whoever wins, but then what if Clemson wins? What if UNLV wins and all that happens? I could go through scenarios here forever, but guys, we would be here all day because trying to predict where teams are ranking in the 12-team era is really, really, really difficult because there are so many more teams at play. And because it's not like a divisional system or a ranking system like the NFL has where you solely base it off of record, the playoff committee has to make their own separate rankings. It's just going to be absolutely fascinating. I could ramble about it all day, but I'm going to end this video before I start talking all your guys' ear off, which I actually already did for just about 30 minutes. In fact, over 30 minutes. So I really appreciate all you watching this video, for sticking with me, sticking through it. As you can tell, I am amped. I am excited. This is going to be a fun college football weekend. Enjoy championship week, and we will all talk yet again on Sunday. Maybe I'll do a couple updates on Saturday, but we will definitely talk Sunday, and I'll give you my first reaction to the college football playoff field. Remember to play hard, but tailgate harder. Have a good weekend, everybody. What a weekend it's going to be. Goodbye.